And they said, let us make a name for ourselves so we won't be scattered. If they were scattered, it'd be like going into oblivion. They wouldn't be a people. They wouldn't have a name. We all want that name. We all want that legacy. And a part of what we do in life is creating an identity and a name that will last. So when you build a city, the city will last beyond your lifetime. You build the ziggurat, and it will last beyond your lifetime, and your name can go on. Your reality can continue. When you have children, your children can bear your name, and even though you've passed away, your name lives on. You see, people want a name because they want to last, they want to endure, they want to be someone. And if we create something, we make a building, a tower, a structure, an organization that outlives us, then our name can be attached to that and we can live on. So they're going to make a name for themselves. And this was religious in nature because of the tower that they were building. Now, one of the things that happened in history was people moved away from God. So religion didn't evolve, religion degenerated. In the beginning, Adam and Eve, Noah and his family, they knew the Creator God, the God of the heavens and the earth. They knew Him. They had communication. They understood the law and the ways of God. But as people moved away from God, they began to create God in their own image. And they developed many gods. And the spirits could be gods, the ancestors could become gods. And there was this belief, and still is today, that through religion, through spirituality, through other means, we can somehow manipulate or work with these gods to get what we want, to secure our place in this world, to have health, to have prosperity, to have endurance. And so they were wanting to bring the God down to ensure that they would have a name that would last. But this reduces God. God is humanized. You know, the pantheons had the male gods, the female gods, and they were just like people, just more power. They fought, they argued, they were jealous, they had wars. All these things happened among the gods, and the people were going through all of these rites and religious exercises and prayers and incantations, all trying to live in this relationship with the gods. If we do this, the God will do that. So you have the God of the sun, the God of the moon, the God of the ocean, the God of the river, the God of the mountain, the God of fertility, the God of agriculture. All these gods and goddesses they had. Clans would have their own gods. Cities would have their patron gods. So they wanted to have this relationship with God that would enable them to endure, to last. It's this idea that we can have the power of God. Through religion, through ritual, through rites, through spiritual exercises, we can have supernatural power that will enable us to prosper and to last. They wanted a name for themselves, a name that would not fade away, that would not disappear, that would not be scattered. John Walton, an Old Testament professor, describes humanity's attempts in this context as a desire to control and to manipulate God. He describes it in three ways. Number one is redistributing God's power. Number two, restricting God's autonomy. And number three, regulating God's power. The first one is polytheism. Rather than the one God who is God of all, overall, the only God, there are many gods, and the power of God is distributed among many gods and goddesses and spirits and powers. Number two, people seek to restrict God's autonomy. What this is if I do this for God, then God must do this for me. And that's a part of the power of religion and spirituality is I will do this and God must do this. God's not autonomous. God is not free, but God is bound by what I say, what I claim, what I do, what I exercise. God must respond to me. And number 3, a manipulation of God's power. The idea that I can control life. I can control what happens to me. I can manipulate what God must do for my benefit. We see this even in health, wealth, prosperity, all kinds of ideas about what God must do for me. They wanted their name to last, which is not wrong in itself. We are created to live. But this is not how God would give them a name that lasts. It says in verse 5, "Then the Lord came down to look over the city and the tower that the humans were building." You see, you got the stairway to heaven, and then God came down. God came down. They wanted God to come down so that they could harness the power and the resources of their God to make their name last. The Lord came down, but it's not what they had hoped for. And this is the central point of this passage of Scripture. I've talked about this occasionally over time, and the Scripture is written as literature, and there's forms and all in it. And this passage of Scripture is something called a chiasm. You don't have to remember that. But the point is that the first phrase and the last phrase are parallel. The second to the last, next to the last, on and on. These are all parallel. And the center point of this is the main point of the passage, this highlighted point of the passage. And it begins, the whole world had one language. It ends, the whole world with one language, or the language of the whole world. But at the center point of this is verse 4 and 5, where it says that God came down. So God responded to what the people were doing. And God opposes their plan. God's against them. God's against what they have devised to do. They wanted their God to come down, but God would not come down to serve them and their plan. Instead, God confuses their languages, and He scatters the people, and the city is not built.